Greetings, everybody. Welcome to TV Skywriter. I'm Pat Murray, your host. Now, with TV Skywriter, now some of you know about the Durham Skywriter. That's Durham's online community paper. When I say Durham, that's Durham, North Carolina. Radio Skywriter is done on WNCU, the jazz station here, one of our NPR stations. But with TV Skywriter, we're not necessarily locally focused. That's where I talk to authors, entrepreneurs, and just interesting people all around the country, people that I think you should know, people I think you should meet. And today's guest lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. Her name is Becky Sansbury. And this title, I want you to explain it. Resilience and Crisis Recovery Consultant.
Thank you, Patricia.
Sure.
We all live by our titles, don't we? Whether
Yes.
other people live by the same titles or not. When you think of crisis, what immediately comes to your mind?
Death. Death of a loved one, having to adjust to something really bad, like a divorce or something.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you didn't have a quick, glib answer to come out, because that's the way crisis hits every one of us. It takes us a little off guard, or sometimes a whole lot off guard.
Yeah.
And when it does, we don't have those immediate answers. It's like it knocks the wind out of us. And when that happens, we react, just like we've been hit.
Mm-hmm.
But when something like that happens, then there comes that gradual time of recovery, and then we have the opportunity for even beyond recovery or stabilization to go to that place of resilience where we move through with strength and with perhaps wisdom that we didn't know that we had before. I was privileged to serve as a hospice chaplain for about 14 years. And in that time, I saw people exhibit exactly what I just described to you. They got walloped with bad news, and then they had that opportunity to find a way to come to peace with that news, and even in the midst of those difficult times, to find places of joy, peace, dignity, some really good parts of life. And that allowed them to be resilient through that time and their families on beyond that time. And then, ironically, during the Great Recession, and I'm sure you remember that well, it hasn't been that many years since we were all really scrambling work-wise.
Definitely.
Lots and lots of really talented people who had done nothing wrong suddenly found themselves out of work because of the economy in the country. And they got hit with that same bang. It affected their careers, their families, their life savings, and obviously their whole sense of self-esteem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had the privilege of working with a team called the Abaddon Group, and we provided coaching and training and counseling for folks in that career crisis. You know, the interesting thing I discovered was that the very same reactions and the same ways of moving through it, to whether you call it recovery or stabilizing, and then moving through and developing those muscles of resilience, they were the same for the folks in career crisis as people had been in health and other kinds of life crisis earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I realized that there was work to be done to help all of us in whatever our life crises may be, to build on some of those gems of wisdom that people had passed on to me that I could then share with other folks. And that's the work that I do now.
Okay. I'm just curious, though. There are so many different, calamities that befall people.
Mm-hmm.
Do they all take pretty much the same amount of time to recover, or are the stronger people able to recover quickly? Is it a matter of strength? Maybe I'm even using the wrong word.
I think that's a great word, great question, because that's something we all tend to think about. We live in a world where things are on timelines. We're on deadlines. We're used to this is going to take this amount of time. We follow processes and plans for everything from how we fix our coffee to how we work on the computer to how much time it's going to take us to get from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
Life shocks don't work on the same time frame. As a matter of fact, they really don't have a time frame. Things are so personal, and it is indeed the perspective and so many other factors of the person who's been involved in whatever this crisis may be. Sometimes it's that particular area that's a more resilient one for us just naturally than others. I can give you a life example if you'd like.
Sure.
One day I was visiting, this was back when I was a hospice chaplain, and I was visiting with a hospice patient who had perhaps 4 to 6 weeks anticipated in her medical prognosis. She knew that her life was probably going to be fairly short, but she was physically very comfortable. Mm-hmm. She was spiritually very comfortable. She had a tremendous support system, and for lack of a better term, she was at peace. I left her visit, saw there was a voicemail on my phone, took the message right away, and it was a friend who lived in another state that I'd known in another time in my life, and the message she left for me was frantic. And so, of course, I called her back right away. I was sure that something absolutely horrendous had happened to her. Mm-hmm. And when she answered the phone, it certainly sounded that way. But suddenly it dawned on me as she started to tell me her tale of woe that this is a woman who had always been extremely healthy. She was an avid tennis player. She ate all the right foods. She ran every morning. And she was used to all but perfect health. And she had encountered a mild infection. She wasn't used to infections, and it threw her for a complete loop. She had to take some medicine. She was itchy. She didn't feel like herself, and you would have thought she was the one who was dying.
I'm glad she didn't.
In our perspective. And this lady, in a few weeks, would be completely over this infection, sailing on with her life. Mm-hmm. And yet, she was the one who was rattled and shaken. Oh. The same thing is true for any of us when we hit one of those life bumps and bruises. There's so many factors that determine how does it affect us and how long does it take us to move in whatever way we move through it. And so there's not a pat answer, but the good news is you can't fail on this part of the test of life because you're the only one that sets the rules.
But here's the scary part. I remember when I was young and I was being told that I was going to be laid off in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. At my job, and I was, it did feel like a punch to the stomach. I was stunned. I was living on my own. It was, my first, real job.
Right.
And I was worried all of a sudden, what am I going to do about my rent and my this and my that? And it didn't take long, but by the end of the day, I had been able to call the part-time. I've always been a bit of a hustler. I always had a full-time and a part-time job. By the end of the day, I had convinced the people that I was working for part-time to take me on full-time.
Great.
But I'm wondering, can everybody do that? I was just very young and I didn't have a lot of fear back then. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, can all of us do that? Or was that I think that was just a fluke on my part. I was just lucky.
I would give you a lot more credit than that, Pat. I would say that you, even at a young age, had career resilience. You, somewhere along the way, had developed, the Yiddish term is chutzpah. You developed that sense within yourself that you could just take on whatever happened.
Well, I had to. I didn't want to lose my apartment.
Absolutely not. So sometimes there are those a bit of healthy fear factors that push us forward. Your need to keep your apartment was actually stronger inside of you than your fear of, oh my goodness, I've lost this part of my income. Mm-hmm. Your overriding factor was, I need to do something about this. Mm-hmm. There are many ways that we approach resilience. one of the things that I talk about with folks is that you heard me use the word stabilize a little bit ago, or stability.
Yes.
We have, if you think of it as human beings, we have 4 main areas that help to stabilize us in life. And what I found in some of those gems of wisdom that I told you about that came from so many wonderful people that they shared with me, I found that there were common themes that had nothing to do with how old we were or where we grew up or how much money we had or where we'd been to school or whether we'd even been to school. But they were 4 things that at any time and in different degrees help us get stable and feel solid. And those 4 are comfort, control, community, and connection to something beyond ourselves.
Good.
At any given time, we can feel like one of them has taken a whack, or we may feel like we need to pump it up a little bit. But when we pay attention to those, they help us to move on. Now, in your situation, you found a way to pay attention to control. You found what you could control, and you stepped aside from the part you couldn't. And you, quick as a wink, did something about the part of your life that you could control. And in a small way, you also tapped into community because you went to the part of your work community where you could have some control, or at least try to regain some control. And you put yourself out there in that community, that career community, and the plan came together. And fortunately for you, it came together pretty quickly. So do you see how you can use one or more of those areas of our common stabilizers to help you move through even after a big bump?
I like that. I like that. But here's that leads me to ask this. It was great for me. I was able to to solve that problem. But I hate the fact that you have to learn these things as they happen to you. Is there a way to train for them? Or is that even a silly
question? Yes and no. Absolutely yes and no. Okay. So let's go with the tough news first.
Okay.
When a child, a baby, a toddler, is learning to walk, do they suddenly go from being in the crib to walking like you and I do?
No.
No. So they fall down, don't they?
Yeah, a lot.
And sometimes they get bumped and scraped. And sometimes they cry. But eventually, if things are working for them physically in the way it normally does for us as human beings, they learn how to walk. So yes, sometimes there are things that we learn through the bumps and the bruises of life. It does help if there's somebody there to soothe us. There's somebody there to take our hand. There's somebody there to encourage us. All of those things, or to show us how to walk better. All those things are important. But when you ask about training, I'm going to take you to another part of life. And I'm going to ask you another question.
Okay.
If you think about a policeman, a firefighter, a soldier, a paramedic, do any of those people in their off time, do they go through any kind of drills or training?
I would think that they all do.
I think they do. And the reason they do is that in the time of crisis, they can operate almost automatically. They train themselves both to be calm in a time of crisis, but also with the details and the specifics of what they've got to do their job. All of those jobs involve danger or quick thinking or reacting to a time of crisis. So yes, there are ways that we can train. There are techniques that we can learn. There are ways that we, as some of the people say, train our brain. We work with our bodies. We develop our community to be strong. We make strong connections to things that are important beyond ourselves, whether that be a faith practice whether it be the role that we have with nature, our connection to nature, or perhaps with the arts of music or photography or dance. It may be the connection that we have to a culture and what that, the roots and the heritage of that culture. But the ways that we can connect to things beyond ourselves, all of those then have ways of sustaining us during a crisis time, and frankly giving us techniques, giving us means of getting through that time, and then actually becoming stronger, the potential to become stronger through that experience.
I understand what you're saying. Okay. Mention those 4 points again. You said comfort. Mention those again. Yeah.
Sure. Comfort, and let me take just a moment on each one, if I may. We sometimes in our, particularly American culture, we think we've got to operate with that old stoic, stiff upper lip, and I don't want to think about comfort. That's for sissies. But frankly, we all have areas of comfort. Why do we talk about comfort food if we don't think about comfort when we need a little extra support? But comfort food, well, sometimes there are those things that perhaps the doctors tell us it's not best for us to eat. But sometimes comfort food also ties into another area of comfort, and that's tradition. Mm-hmm. I used to have hospice patients, or patients when I worked in the hospital as a chaplain, who perhaps at that time couldn't eat much or couldn't perhaps eat at all. But they would like to reminisce about the occasions around food, or holidays, or perhaps their grandmother, or family reunions, or church gatherings. And they could talk about food and feel comforted with that memory, almost as if they were eating that apple pie or that fried chicken or whatever it might be that was special to them. Mm-hmm. And we find comfort in our religious rituals as well, and that's a little bit separate from that connection to something beyond ourselves, but in the actual appreciation of the rituals of our faith. We find comfort in our soft blanket. We find comfort in our slippers. We find comfort in our daily habits. And one of the things I encourage people to do in a time of crisis is find something from your regular daily habits that you can do at this time that will make you feel more relaxed. Maybe it's knowing that you can look at the paper sometime, the newspaper sometime during the day. Maybe it's a television show that makes you laugh or takes your mind off of things. We all have different areas of comfort, but it is an important part of us as human beings. That second one is control. Control. I don't know about you, but I don't like being out of control or feeling out of control. How about you?
I don't either.
No. And most people don't. And it's like any of these 4 C's that I talk about. We all have varying degrees of how important they are to us. So again, there's no one magic answer. But with control, we like to think that we have the information that we need. We like to think that we can in some way have an effect over what happens during our day, or we can affect what happens to our loved ones, that we can be in charge of some things. And when crisis happens, boy, control just takes a whack in the knees, and it will knock us down pretty quickly. And for a bit, you feel like you can't control anything. Here's one of the ways where we sometimes, by the help of family or friends or even professionals who are there to help us, we can find, maybe we can't control everything, but there are certainly some places where we can control something. When my dad was in World War II, part of the time he was stationed in London. And London was getting bombed day in and day out. And those Londoners could not control those German airplanes. But here's one thing they could control. My dad said that when the air raid sirens would go off, those British stalwarts would grab their teapots and a tea bag, or this was loose tea, and they would run to the air raid shelter, to those bomb shelters. And I'll tell you, it was like they may be leveling my home or my apartment building, but they're not going to stop me from having a cup of tea at 4 o'clock, because that's tea time.
Wow.
And that's when I started learning about, even in the most dire circumstances, we find something that we can control. And then that's that first step of getting our foot feeling like it's on a little bit of solid ground. Mm-hmm. So that's the second one. The third one is community. Mm-hmm. And community has so many different meanings to people. Some people like to be part of lots of different communities. The community of my family, the community of my church, the community where I live, social groups, fraternal groups, cultural groups, sports groups. Oh, when I first moved to the Raleigh-Durham area, one of the first questions I got asked is, what color are you for? And I didn't know what they meant. Well, they were talking about, was I Wolfpack red, or Tar Heel light blue, or Duke dark blue, or East Carolina U purple and gold. And I had to find out that college sports around here was really big community.
That's a big deal.
So there are all kinds of communities. But being connected to some kind of a community is very important, both in our regular life, and it becomes extremely important when we hit a time of crisis. Now, there are introverts and extroverts. There are people who like a lot of people and people who like just a few. But most of us want somebody beyond just ourselves in our lives. Mm-hmm. Now, we may keep them at a little bit of a safe distance, and we may say where our boundaries are. But most of us want to be connected to somebody beyond just person me. And those communities become important. And I've now learned about a newer kind of community. And you're actually tagging into that, Pat. It's the online community.
Oh, yeah.
And I heard folks, perhaps in an older generation, say, well, this Facebook stuff with calling people friends that you hardly even know, or maybe you never met in person, those aren't really your friends. And I'll certainly admit that friend takes on different meaning in the online world. Definitely. But I've known people who have gotten to know folks in different ways online and formed very meaningful, different kinds of friendships. Mm-hmm. I have a friend who is very involved in the very serious gaming world in the online, and is very proficient at it, and he's also very, very honest when he's involved with these intensely intellectual online games. And he's earned massive respect from people who share his interest because they know he's going to keep the rules. And he's someone they can turn to if they've got a question about the game, because he's going to be honest. A different kind of community. And then the fourth area of stabilizing is our connection to something beyond ourselves. It has a little overlap with community, but it's a bit different because it can also be very private and personal. People often find this in their religious beliefs. They may find it in philosophical beliefs that aren't necessarily religious, but they speak to the spirit or the heart. People may find this in their connection to something that's way beyond themselves. As I mentioned earlier, perhaps the arts. It may be nature. It may be to their cultural heritage, to their family traditions, but it's about the family, not just their interaction with the people, but what's significant and important to the family.
It's
and
sort of like
each of these are anchors. Yes.
Isn't it like finding something that helps you to find where you are in the world?
That's a good way to put it. That's a very good piece of language to use around all of this. But all of these 4 C's help you to feel stabilized on this earth. And like I said, for any of us at different times, any one of them may take on different degrees of meaning, in addition to the fact that we have different ways of expressing or feeling them. But they're important to us. And paying attention to them at any time is good. But during a time of crisis, whether it's your own or somebody else's, is really, really crucial.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been part of a family or a group and someone had something that was really bad that happened to them, and you're standing aside and you're saying, oh, what, I wish I could do something to help them. I don't know what to do. I feel so helpless.
Sure.
Well,
Absolutely.
that's pretty common. And one of the things that, with good intentions, people will sometimes say to that person in the bad spot, if you need me, I'm there, or if there's something you need me to do, you just let me know. And maybe that's happened to you, I don't know. But people who've been through tough times will often say privately, I appreciated, the fact that they were saying something nice or they were concerned, but I can't think of what I want them to do, and they must not know me very well if they can't think of anything to do to help or what to say.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you can do if you're a friend or a family member is take yourself in your mind to those 4 C's and think about that person. Perhaps immediately think out of those 4 C's, there's one that's really important to that person that you could, without having to say, what can I do for you, and put the person who's already going through a tough time and their mind's scrambled and they can't think straight and their emotions are all out of whack, instead of putting them on the spot to think about something, you can think about something. So let me give an example. When all else fails, there's nothing like a casserole. That's the ultimate comfort food.
Really? Okay.
Maybe you know them well enough to know what they like to eat and don't like to eat. Don't say, well, what do you want me to fix? Think about what you know about them and fix it or pick it up and just take it by. Or if you're afraid you might be a little intrusive, at least call and say, I'm fixing so-and-so. Would you like some? I'm going by this or that restaurant, and I'm going to be picking up something for myself. So it takes the burden off of them. And then you can just say, would you like me to pick up X, Y, or Z for you? Mm-hmm. And then to tag into community, if you're concerned that maybe they just need somebody with them, then when you take that food by, say, well, would you like for us to just sit and eat together? And that way, if they want to have some company, they can say yes. And if they say, well, I'm not hungry right now, that's a signal that maybe they just need some alone time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe you know that person is very close to, maybe it's an alumni group from the local alumni group from their school. Perhaps one of the things that you could do with the information that that person has allowed to be made public is just you be the one to let people know, hey, our friend Joe has hit this tough time, and he'd like people to know, but right now he doesn't have the time or the strength or whatever to be making phone calls. Mm-hmm. So there are ways you think about those 4 C's, and you can tap into them. If you think about a tire that maybe has got a hole in it, that you're someone who's helping to pump it up and put a little plug on it.
That's good. That's real good advice. Okay.
Great.
Now, there's something that you wanted to discuss. People might say, oh, why do you want to talk about such things during the holiday season? But actually, to talk about end-of-life care and respite care, I think it's actually useful, because if you're feeling, very often when a person's like really super sick, someone you're taking care of or a loved one, very often you just don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And if you're able to take care of yourself and to do something, we're going to talk about what respite care and hospice is, that can put you and your loved one at ease in a way that is so much better than just struggling all by yourself, feeling totally overwhelmed and just totally frazzled.
That's very true. That's very true, Pat. And you know, our life circumstances don't operate by calendar.
Yeah.
And our feelings don't operate by calendar, other than the fact that sometimes they're intensified by the calendar. Mm-hmm. We live in a wonderful, wonderful country that appreciates traditions and holidays and celebrations. And that's fantastic. And when life's rolling along fairly steady, there's nothing more heart than some of the traditions that we have around getting together in family or friend groups, enjoying good food and laughter and sometimes gift exchanging and music and all those great things.
Oh, yeah.
But if your family circumstances, your health, perhaps your memories at that time of year don't allow you to do that, then suddenly you start feeling worse. So let's step back and take a look at the first part of your question, and that is, why on earth would we bring up things like end of life when we are talking about resilience? What does that have to do with resilience? And certainly, why would we be doing it? Our conversation is taking place in November, and people are thinking about holidays.
Right.
Well, one of the things that is definitely true is that our feelings and our circumstances are going to be there whether we talk about them or not. One of the things our talking about them allows us to do is to, first of all, to have information to work with, and then it allows us to have the inspiration of people who can uplift us and help us through whatever those times might be. When we think about the information that we need, sometimes when we are approaching the end of life or our loved one is, we don't want to talk about that. We think that that's going to make things worse.
Yeah.
But what we do need during those times is information about what will help people be comfortable. We talked earlier about comfort. So if it's the person who's sick, what is going to help them be physically, emotionally, and spiritually comfortable? And as a caregiver or a friend, what is going to do that for us as well? Because caregivers certainly bear a lot of, maybe not the same physical problem as the patient, but caregiving takes a physical toll on a caregiver, and certainly does an emotional and a spiritual one as well. One of the things I found when I worked with hospice was that people often really want to be able to talk about these matters. They want information. They want to be able to talk about their own feelings, but they don't know how to get started. And so it's very important to have folks with whom you feel comfortable. I call it sometimes that safe stranger, who is close enough to you that feels very safe for you to be with, but isn't part of maybe that inner circle of your family or your very, very closest friends. So maybe they aren't quite as impacted emotionally as you are, whether you're the person who's sick or you're the person who's taking care of them, whether you're the person who's going through a divorce or the person who's lost a job or a family member of folks in those circumstances. So it is important, whether it's end of life, end of career, end of relationship, to be looking at those things honestly and to say, what kind of professional help will bring me the kind of guidance that I need and the comfort, and actually allow me to regain some control during this time that may feel very out of control. And what are those things that will help the caregivers or the friends or the family as well? In end-of-life care, one of those ways can definitely be the use of a hospice team. And hospice, bless its heart, has been so misunderstood by so many. And not with bad intentions, just not clearly understood because people don't want to talk about that. But what I've found is that when people are introduced to hospice and then have the benefit of the deep well of support and care that comes with that, then suddenly they're much more relaxed, they're physically more comfortable, and in all the other ways that we've just talked about, they start to get stabilized.
is there a difference between hospice care and respite care? Because when I first mentioned hospice to you, we were having a little conversation.
Mhm.
I honestly thought that hospice was like where your loved one goes right before they die. And you said that's
And
not always the case. That really surprised me.
okay, well, you are right on one count.
Okay.
Well, more than one count. Hospice can involve a physical location, a hospice house or a hospice facility, and you
Right.
certainly aren't wrong. And definitely it is for the end stage of a person's life. So you're right again. So give yourself credit for two correct answers.
Okay.
All we're going to do is expand what you already knew and take it out to a bigger, bigger, bigger degree. And the good news of that is it means that there's more help available than people realize.
Hmm.
Hospice is, first of all, it's a way of caring for folks. It's a way of caring for people that involves their physical care, their emotional care, if they choose, their spiritual care, extra companionship, extra hands-on help, and it involves a team of professionals and some volunteers who embody all of that. It is for people who have what I refer to, and others do too, as a life-limiting illness. One
Okay.
in which, by a doctor's best prognosis, and we know the doctors aren't God, but they are very well trained, and so by their best medical prognosis, they anticipate that based on the progression of a person's illness, that they have 6 months or less to live.
Okay.
And so that's the basic guideline for being considered for a hospice patient as a hospice patient.
And, and
Care
again, and
care
again,
will
hospice
take place.
is not always a place, right?
No, care will take place in a home, the patient's home, or maybe the home of a family member.
Oh.
It can take place in a facility like an assisted living facility or a nursing home where the hospice team comes in to help supplement the nursing home staff. So they're not in competition, they work in complement with each other.
Okay.
Or it can take place in a designated hospice facility.
Okay.
So
Okay.
all of those, it's where the patient resides. That's where hospice care takes place.
Okay. Okay. So what
And
usually
go
happens?
ahead.
I mean, is it like the team diagnoses a type of, do they take over the patient's day and
Okay.
do what they feel the patient needs, or does the patient and the family direct what happens during the day?
That is a terrific question. I'm so glad you asked that. There is one part of things to keep in mind, and that is, of course, the physician, the MD, who is the admitting doctor for that patient, is still that person's doctor. So there are some things that the doctor obviously will be guiding, the medications and any treatment regime that's going on for that patient and the comfort measures. But to the greatest degree possible, the patient and the folks around that patient providing care direct a huge amount of how a patient's day goes, the degree of hospice involvement. Um, it's very much considered that in every way possible, that patient and the caregivers around them are the folks that are in charge, and the hospice team is there to serve them. Now, the hospice team is going to make suggestions,
Mm-hmm.
and they will do some assessing of the situation, and then whether it's physical, perhaps in taking a look at a patient's environment and saying, I know that you've been comfortable in your regular bed, but we're going to suggest that perhaps a hospital bed would be more comfortable for you because it helps the caregiver not hurt his or her back in moving you, and you can sit up more easily or change your angle or direction. And then the social worker would say, and because of your Medicare or your Medicaid or insurance, I see that that's all covered, and there's a huge amount that's covered under hospice care that's not covered pre-hospice care. So a lot of medications, a lot of medical equipment that might be needed, and medical supplies that pertain to that patient's condition. Suddenly the social worker and the nurse working together are going to know what's covered and say you can have this and this and this provided to you free of charge because of the hospice benefit that's covered by Medicare, Medicaid, and most insurance companies.
Okay.
And then if you choose to have a chaplain or a spiritual care professional visit you in addition to your own clergy, or some people don't have clergy, but they say, well, I'd like to have that spiritual care provider from hospice just stop by. Then they're not there to tell you what you should or shouldn't believe. They're there to find out what is important to you as a human being and to support that. And that was the privilege that I had in my years as a hospice chaplain, was to find out what my patients and family members thought and believed and was important to them. And then my role wasn't to say, oh, that's not important, you should believe this instead. My role and my delight was to say, well, let's find ways to do more of that or have more of that or increase that in your life. And then if you're a person who wants some visitors, then hospice has volunteers who can come in to provide some bedside support. And you mentioned the term respite. One of the ways hospice helps with that respite is that volunteer can perhaps sit with the patient for a little while the caregiver gets a breather. Sometimes just takes a nap. I had one patient that the caregiver loved a certain TV show. And so the volunteer would come in and just keep the patient company. Sometimes the patient didn't even particularly want to talk, but knew that that volunteer was just sitting quietly by the bed in case they needed somebody. And the caregiver was free to go off in another room, not have to worry about the patient, listen for the patient, and do anything, but just relax and watch that TV show. So
That's
volunteers provide
nice.
lots of kinds of respite.
That's nice because then they could do something for themselves too.
Absolutely. Respite, I'm sorry, that's okay. The term respite means temporary relief, and there's all kinds of temporary relief. You have to remember that not all hospice patients are confined to their beds. If you think about a person in the last 6 months of their life, quite often they're still up and about. And so some of that temporary relief came about in a lot of ways. I had a patient who thoroughly loved being able to have some ice cream and was allowed to have ice cream. And so part of the temporary relief I provided was when I would come, and I had the nurse's permission to do this, I'd bring the patient some ice cream, and we'd go out and sit outside. It was warm weather, and look at the sky and the birds and the flowers, and it gave not only the caregiver some respite or temporary relief, it gave that patient some respite. We weren't talking about her cancer or her heart disease or whatever her problem was. I don't remember her illness. I remember talking about her love of nature and the fact that she absolutely loved chocolate mint ice cream. And we enjoyed it. So we get temporary relief from lots of things. Hospice is about life. It's about living that last chapter of life with comfort and with dignity in the way that you can do best. And so it's not about just sitting around and talking about dying all the time, although sometimes people need that safe stranger. They don't want to burden their family. They don't want to burden even their own minister. And they need somebody to talk about those feelings. But it doesn't mean you have to talk about them all the time.
But you know what? What you just said really struck home with me because when I was a kid, I used to babysit one of the little ones across the street. It so happened that the child got a illness and was dying, and his parents were not ever able to admit that, or come to terms with the fact that he was going to die, he wanted to talk about it. He asked parents about it, and they would shut him down every time. They never did discuss death at all with the child. He had to die just with questions. And I think it's really important for this respite care and these volunteers who are available to talk about whatever the patient wants to talk about. I think that's really important.
It is very important. And then there are times that there's even a greater degree of respite care that's provided under what we call the hospice benefit, the Medicare, Medicaid benefit, that covers hospice care if a patient is on Medicare or Medicaid. And that allows a patient to go for perhaps a day or two into a care facility. Sometimes it's a skilled nursing home. Sometimes it may be a hospice facility, and be totally cared for a few days, and let the caregiver or the family have a complete break. Maybe get out of town for the day. Maybe go see somebody else. Maybe go to the lake and just get some rest and get their mind in another place so they can come back refreshed. So sometimes there's really big respite care available, and sometimes it's just what you and I have been talking about on that day-to-day piece. And by the way, when you go back to the story when your neighbor, when that child was dying, for parents to admit to themselves, first of all, that their child may die is probably the very, very hardest thing. And often, as you mentioned with those parents, definitely an impossibility. And then to be able to talk openly with the child about that is almost beyond impossible for so many parents. But that is where that safe stranger comes in. And it is an awareness that maybe my child needs someone to talk to, separate from me as a parent, or maybe I as a parent need somebody to talk to separate from my child. And that's very normal and very, very understandable.
Yeah. Now, how do people take advantage of this other type of respite care where the person is actually in a hospital or whatever for a day or two?
That's available to a person who is a hospice patient in any hospice organization. And there are many hospice organizations in some communities have multiple hospice organizations. Like we are fortunate here in the Raleigh-Durham Chapel Hill area, but many larger communities have a variety of hospice services available, hospice organizations. In a smaller community, it may be just one for the county or for that community. And so you would find out through the hospice of which you were a patient who was seeing you. Let's put this back. If whatever hospice was taking care of you or your loved one, they would be the ones to tell you what they could offer or provide in respite services.
I see. I really appreciate your giving us all this really useful information.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Oh, sure. I want to transition to back to the holidays.
Okay.
And basically, when you were on my radio show last year, you had some great things to say about families who have just suffered maybe the loss of a loved one or just a huge negative change in their lives, and how to deal with the kids and how the adults deal with each other and trying to get through the holidays. Very often we put on our game face and don't even acknowledge that someone has died. And you had some really good pointers on how to deal with this situation.
Well, thanks, Pat. I hope that my memory will serve me well. If not, we'll come up with some new ones for this year. One of the things that is so significant about any kind of crisis and the holidays themselves is that when they come together, it's like the old-fashioned pressure cooker, and you turn up the heat. Because what the holidays do is they turn up the heat on that pressure cooker that you feel like you're already in and bouncing around in a time of crisis. And suddenly what can happen is it feels like the top's going to blow off of that pressure cooker when the heat gets too high. And that is what happens when people are in a time of disruption. And you said it well. Sometimes it can be the disruption of mourning a loss of a friend or family member, but it can be other types of disruption too. Trying to cope with the holidays when perhaps suddenly someone's lost a job. And the holidays, let's face it, they take money. You have to be pretty creative we say, oh, you know, the best things in life are free, and trust me, I believe that to my heart of hearts. But if you're trying to keep up holiday traditions or meet the expectations of children, it gets real challenging if suddenly income has been greatly reduced, or you know it's going to be greatly reduced very soon. Mm-hmm. And the same is true if it's disruption of relationships. Maybe it hasn't been a death, but maybe there's been the ending of a significant a marriage or a deep friendship where you feel that there's a part of your heart that's missing. Mm-hmm. So when that happens, and we have all these expectations from TV and the movies and the magazines of we're all supposed to be joyous and happy and dressed beautifully and eating all this terrific food and exchanging gorgeous gifts that are the perfect gifts, and everybody's going to be thrilled and happy and go home and sing tra-la-la, ho-ho-ho. It just doesn't always happen that way. So when you put the part of us that's feeling completely destabilized and whacked in the gut with the expectations that we have, let's admit it. You know, it doesn't happen that way. There are family fusses. People get sick on the holiday food, or maybe they had to start a diet 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, or whatever. You know, or you just had an argument with Uncle George, and please don't seat me beside him at the Thanksgiving or Christmas table because we're not speaking to each other right now. Whatever it is. The holidays are never as perfect as they get painted anyway. But what can we do to help the holidays have some degree of being anywhere from at least bearable to being actually positive in a new way? And perhaps that's the key thing, is to realize that we've got to start out with a mindset of no matter what we do, it's not going to be the same.
Right.
And for this year, that has to be the accepted. And maybe for several years, it won't be the same, and all our pretending and trying won't make it the same. So let's accept the fact it's not going to be the same. And if that's the case, then let's take a look at our 4 C's. What in this area of things being different will make us feel comfortable? Will it be maybe making Grandma's pie by her recipe, even though Grandma passed away in July and now it's Thanksgiving? So will it make us feel comfortable to make her pie by her recipe while we're being honest? Grandma's not here, but we're remembering her by her pie. Or will it make us feel more comfortable to say, boy, I couldn't even swallow a bite of that pie thinking about Grandma. It would just choke me up. So we'll have cake this year instead of pie, or we'll have a different kind of pie. And we won't try to do that because it'll just grab me right here, and I can't handle that.
Too much pressure.
Too much pressure. Maybe if we look at control, now there's a big one. So we think about situations where maybe families have always allotted a certain budget for Christmas, let's say, because we think of budgets and Christmas and gifts, etc. And now either there's no emotional budget. We think only of money with budgets, but we have emotional budgets too. Maybe I just don't have the emotional budget to go out and spend time buying gifts and wrapping gifts and thinking about who should get what. And because everything feels out of control right now. And maybe someone's in the hospital, and my mind is just jumbled on that, and all I can think about is what's the schedule for the intensive care unit when I'm allowed to go visit. And I don't have any mental or emotional space left over or any budget to think about presents. But maybe within my control, I would have enough to think about what's one gift that would be special for my spouse, my child, my grandchild, my best friend. Maybe I can't control the way I've always done Christmas, but maybe I would feel like I had a little bit of control in this situation if I could just think of one thing. And then be able to say to that person, I would love to be able to give you everything imaginable, but I thought of one thing right now that I can give you. Or maybe it's not a thing. Maybe it's a service. Maybe it's a gift of love. But it's something that allows you to feel like maybe it's not Christmas like always. So whether it's emotional budget or financial budget, but here's one thing that I can do. And what we find is most people go, oh, wow, something special for me, and you thought of that when all of this craziness was going on? That's just amazing.
Okay.
And suddenly, we've taken what seemed like a really bad situation, and it's become a very special one.
Okay. That's very nice. That's very nice. Now, I do remember during the radio show, you also gave us pointers on how to deal with children and teenagers, especially in cases where, for example, maybe there's been a loss in the family, or like you said, loss of a job or whatever, and the teen says, I don't want to, I want to go to Johnny's house. I don't want to be with the family. I want to hang out with Johnny.
Yep.
You really want him to be home with the family, but he would have to be at his friend's house, and you're insulted by it. So how do you deal with that?
Again, remembering that everybody's emotions are running on high. They're running on the edge of control. And they're running on the deepest of feelings and on the top level of being just about out of control. The things that might have been said the year before that you just dusted off and go, oh, that's Jim, whatever. He's just kind of, he couldn't breathe without Johnny. These two guys are like peas in a pod. They got to be together, whatever. But suddenly now it becomes, oh my goodness, your grandmother, would be horrified that you weren't here for the family. And how disrespectful of you, and grandmother passed away, and you're showing huge disrespect. Suddenly the same situation looks very different. First of all, given our own emotions. So that's that perspective piece. But then the other part of it is to realize that Jim may not be able to say to you, I don't think I can handle Cousin Cora's crying for 5 more minutes. I know she loved Grandma, but she's sending me over the edge with all that crying stuff. He probably is not going to be able to say that, and perhaps he's trying to be thoughtful of you to not be rude. So the easier thing is to say, I need to be over at Johnny's house. All of a sudden, we got mixed messages going on around everything, and feelings get rubbed raw very, very quickly when we're dealing with grief, disruption, all of those problems that we talked about. So sometimes, if we can just literally step back, and I mean that, maybe we just need, when Jim says, I'm going to Johnny's house, rather than speaking that old rule of get yourself away from the situation for a few minutes and don't say something that you're going to regret. We do need that space to clear our heads and our emotions sometimes. So it may be that that's a good time for you to go and stir the gravy. It may be that's a good time for you to need to step outside for a few minutes. And in that time, be able to just kind of step back and frankly pay attention to where your own emotions are. Pay attention to what's going on in the room or the house that may be kind of pushing Jim to say that. Think about Jim for a minute, how he's been before, and how this is now. There's that community piece. That's one of those 4 C's. Think of how important for your Jim, when the world's been wacky and screwy because Grandma was the matriarch of the family, and maybe he couldn't let down. He's 15. 15-year-old guys aren't going to cry because Grandma died, even though they love Grandma dearly. But all of these things are running around in Jim's mind and heart. And maybe what he needs is the community of his best bud, Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's where sometimes the graceful art of negotiation comes in. If you haven't created a mini crisis of its own by picking an argument or inflaming the situation, you can step back in, or even if you have, you can step back. But you can come back to Jim and say, hey, I know you and Johnny are really good buds. And I'm sure, it's a holiday and you want to see your best friends on the holiday. And you can even make light of it a little bit. Hey, I know Johnny's mom's a really good cook, too, so you probably want some of her cornbread dressing. It's always more moist than mine, or, just something to lighten things up. But to be honest, and instead of laying a guilt trip, like, well, your grandmother would expect you to be here with the family all day long, to just get real and say, Jim, I just need to let you know that I will miss you, and I'm glad you're going to be with your friend. But could you maybe come back for dessert with us? It would just mean so much to me. If maybe you could just come in and have sweet potato pie with us after you've had the main meal over at Johnny's house. And maybe you're here for half an hour. And you know what? Your little cousin, Leah, she adores you. And if you could just take a little while and, hey, maybe put her on your back and ride her around the house, and we can all tickle her and everybody can laugh and have a good time. And you're the guy that's strong enough to be able to do that, and that would really help me out a lot. And suddenly you have taken this and reframed it. Instead of putting a guilt trip on him, you've helped to, first of all, strengthen and stabilize him. He's going to get some time with his friend. You haven't put guilt on him. You've been real about where, from your heart, you need him. And frankly, we all need that control of our ego boosted up a little bit when it's authentic. And hey, he plays on the football team. He can throw his 8-year-old little girl cousin on his back and run around the house a little bit and help everybody to laugh and feel lighter. So there's ways when you can step back and again go back to those 4 C's of ways that each of us can stabilize each other and a whole situation. And suddenly everybody's breathing a little easier.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to go back to something that you were talking about earlier, and that is how to help someone who's maybe you're a little removed from the situation. Maybe it's not your immediate family, but your cousin or your neighbors who have suffered a loss. And a lot of us just kind of duck out of the way because we don't know what to say or what to do. But what other ways can we help? In other words, like for example, suppose you know that your neighbors take real pride in how their house is looking and all that sort of thing, but because of a recent death, they haven't put up their lights, and you notice maybe things are in disarray. Is it okay to ask them if you could help with that?
It certainly is. And there's really, Pat, there's 2 ways to approach this, and part of it really comes down to how solid your friendship already is or how well you know each other. Mm-hmm. There may be some things, as long as you're not insulting that person. Maybe you're out trimming the bushes around your house, kind of neat, getting things a little neater yourself. And they keep their hedges the same way you do. So maybe you don't even bother them. You just go ahead and trim theirs and yours at the same time. That's because you know each other well, you do things the same way. You don't have to worry that you're going to somehow make things worse.
Okay.
But it's certainly good to ask in specifics and just say, you can even reference, I know, you can even say, I know that your wife has been ill or your husband's been sick, and I haven't wanted to bother you. I'm afraid maybe I would call at the wrong time or it wasn't a good time for me to stop by. But I'd really like to do something because you've been such good friends of mine. May I, and then think of something practical that you could do that you sense that maybe they need.
Or maybe something that the husband used to do, but because he's gone now, it's not being done.
Exactly. And it's fine to even say, you know, I'd really like to do something special for you. I have a really good friend who's a mechanic. If it's time for your oil change, it would be really a pleasure for me if I could just take your car over there and just get that taken care of for you so you don't have to think about it.
Wow.
Or, you know, you can even say, you know, one of the treats I give myself sometimes is to take my car over to the car wash. And I'd love to do that for you. May I do that? And when you put it that way, and you also let the person know that in some ways they're doing you a favor by letting you do that for them.
Oh, okay. I
Then
like
it
that.
helps to take off that sense of guilt of, well, I guess I'm in a really bad way if she's got to do that for me.
Okay. I like it. And to go back again to how you dealt with that young Jim, what occurred to me is that not only was the mom acknowledging how he felt, she was also letting him know how important he was to the family and where he fit in.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make a point that was really good, what you said.
If you remember, Pat, at the very beginning, we talked about comfort and dignity.
Mm-hmm.
And dignity is very much part of that message that you were talking about just then. It's helping this young man with his dignity as he stands sort of in that bridge between being one of the kids and coming into his adulthood. And when there are ways that we can pay attention to our own dignity and the dignity of people around us, man, it taps on all those stabilizers. It makes us feel more comfortable. We feel some control. It makes us more a part of a community, whether it's a friendship or a family. And frankly, it connects us to that part of life that we're growing into that's beyond ourselves.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very nice. Now, your job as a resilience and crisis recovery consultant makes me ask this. Do you help individuals or groups? How do you, do people just call you when there is a crisis? Or are you called in anticipation of something happening?
Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes.
Wow. Wow.
One of the delights of having your own business is you have the opportunity to determine how you do business.
Okay.
Let me see if I can clarify that for you a little bit. I do some one-on-one work with folks, normally short-term, when people have hit a bump in the road. I am not a mental health therapist. I am not a psychiatrist by any means, but I am a clinically trained person in this whole area because of my chaplaincy training. So my work is with people who aren't necessarily dealing with mental health issues, but they have hit some kind of a disruption in their life, whether it's all the different types of things that we've already spoken of in this program.
Sure.
And so my work will be with them normally maybe over even just a few months' time, maybe once or twice a month, to have an hour or two to work through how they're handling things and how they want to handle things. So it's a fairly short-term piece of things. And then, I'm sorry?
Is this type of work done at their place, or at your place, or at...
Right. It depends on, frankly, our geographic setting. I tend to, definitely it would be in a private setting. And so whether they would meet with me here in Raleigh, or if they were close by in the Triangle, if there were reasons of privacy. Sometimes there are people in the business world who would like to talk with someone like me, and I call myself in that situation a crisis consultant, because that's sort of an easy generic term. And they may want me to come by their place of business and meet with them behind closed doors, so they don't have to leave during a business day. And so in that situation, I will do that. And if somebody said, well, who was that? They can call me whatever kind of consultant they want to. Although normally if people are hitting some sort of a brick wall, other people know without knowing the specifics. But as far as I'm concerned, the client can refer to me by whatever, as long as it's polite terminology they want to. And then I do go in and do training with either leadership teams or with groups. We talked about earlier that there are things that you can drill and prepare for. So I hope that the conversation that we've had over this period of time has helped give you and your viewers ideas about the fact that, yes, we can start to prepare ourselves for disruptions and crisis in life. And then, of course, I do go into organizations when there's been a crisis. Perhaps it has been something that's happened to one of their key leaders. Perhaps something has happened in the workplace that has either been frightening or distressing or upsetting. So whether it's a bit of workplace violence, whether there has been an employee, maybe there was an embezzlement and everybody was just shocked. How could this happen? How could Sue do that? And all of a sudden everybody is feeling completely off base. They can't concentrate. They can't do their work. Life is constantly what we used to call water cooler conversations, people just needing to talk about this situation. What businesses have found is if they will bring someone like me in to go ahead and help people work through their feelings about all of this and get some perspective from that safe stranger, that they can actually get back to work sooner because it gives them a base to work from. Okay. And perhaps there's been a natural disaster and people, again, are just, they're disrupted. They're off base and they need some perspective. And then I do, from the stage presentations, I do keynotes and speeches for meetings, organizations, conventions, conferences that have a combination of the information that I have to share about moving from a place of reaction to a place of resilience, and it hopefully has that inspirational part to it also.
Well, a lot of what you do is so intensely personal. I'm wondering, is it possible to do it online?
The way it is possible to do it would be in a private exchange, whether it was through Skype or through a Google connection. Or simply some people don't need that facial connection and they prefer to just do it by phone. When I was going through a rugged period of my life, and like everybody else, I've hit those bumps and bruises too. And I was working with a coach who was helping me as much with my personal problems as thinking through some business things. And all of our work was done over the phone. She became a very important person in my life. We talked 3 times a month, and she was very important in helping me make that bridge from feeling like everything was falling apart to I had some hope for the future.
Wow, that's wonderful. Is it too soon, or did you want to at least mention the book that's going to come out, I guess, early next year, called After the Shock?
That is correct. I do have a book coming out in the first quarter of 2015, and that is the name. That is my process, After the Shock. You heard part of the process tonight. There's 3 more parts to it, so it is a 7-step process. But the book will be coming out, and it will be written, I call it for everybody, in that it's not specifically written for therapists or for professionals in the counseling field. It's written for every one of us who just hit bumps and bruises along the way. It's very down to earth. It's not filled with a lot of jargon and technical mumbo jumbo. It's written in little chunks, so you may just want to read part of it right now and come back to part of it later. So it's written so that you can pick it up and put it down and pick it up and put it down.
Nice. And they can learn about it, I guess, if they keep up with you by going to your website, I suppose.
Right. And one of the things I've done to try to make it easy for folks is my website is based on my name. So it's BeckySansbury.com. So you can reach me by email through Becky@BeckySansbury.com. My website is www.BeckySansbury.com, and that's how you can also find me on Facebook. I have both a Becky Sansbury page and I have an After the Shock page, as you might imagine, since that's the process. And on LinkedIn for business people, I'm there as Becky Sansbury. So try to make it very easy to find me. However is the best way for you to reach out to me.
Well, thank you so much, Becky Sansbury, for being on the show. I'll be talking to you real soon. I'm hoping to get you on my radio show again.
Thank you, Pat. It's always a privilege to be with you because you make having an interview with you so easy. I appreciate it. You did not put me through a shock.
Well, thank you. And if you'd like to be a guest on TV Skywriter, if you're local, you might want to be on Radio Skywriter. That's what I do on WNCU on Sundays. It precedes this show. If you're not in this area, then you might want to be on TV Skywriter. Done here via Google+. The show becomes a YouTube video after it airs. It's very, very useful. You really want to get the word out about what they're doing. Just contact me, Patricia A. Murray, by sending an email to durhamskywriter@gmail.com. I'll see you next Sunday. Ciao.